Okay, we're going to begin. So for the last seminar of the semester. So a couple of announcements. Quiet, please. Going to begin. So a couple of announcements. One, please turn off your wireless if possible. Second of all, if you have any seminar suggestions for next year, please put them in the course evaluations or mail them to me. I'm always looking for suggestions, either speakers or if you have some subject we didn't talk about this year, you'd like to hear about, please get those to me also. Okay, so the seminar is open to the public at all times. So next semester, if there's some seminar that you're interested in, please come. So for the last seminar, I'm really happy here to present Shimon Edelman. Shimon's a professor in the Department of Psychology here at Cornell and with degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. Much of his research and scientific interests have been in the in evolution and consciousness, and he's written a couple of monographs in this regard. Most recent ones were the Consciousness Revolutions, from Amiga Awareness to Human Emancipation. And another one is Life, Death, and Other Inconvenient Truths, a realist view of the human condition. But most recently, Shimon has been very interested in climate change, which of course he's going to talk to us about today. And he's teaching a course now, I believe is offered this coming fall, in confronting climate change. So there you go.
So it's my first slide. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, Peter. And thank you to the organizers for making it possible. So yeah, I will not have time today to finish talking about everything that I want to talk to, everything that needs to be talked about. So here's a semester-long, a pointer to a semester-long course on this stuff that I'll be discussing today. So here we are, far above Cayuga waters, one of my favorite Ithaca related in the spirit paintings. And its spirit, unfortunately, is very different from what you've been exposed to if you're far from not just Cayuga waters, but far from Day Hall and from the trustees' mansions. The world is burning. You don't need a reminder, but I will start by reminding you of that nevertheless. So this is a depiction actually of Aeneas, the legendary founder of Rome, fleeing from the sack of Troy. Troy imagined as this Western city. Well, the world is like that in most places, except those that are very, very lucky. Ithaca has been so far one of them. I hesitated which one slide to use to drive home the point of the climate catastrophe being a catastrophe, and it's very, very difficult to make a choice. So I went for the obvious, which is just from today, from Climate Pulse, the website, temperature anomaly, and the annual temperature average over the globe. The year we are in, 2025, is the dark red curve here. We're way above the normal, and this is not normal. Indeed, it's catastrophic, and I will not speak more to that because I'm sure you all know just how terrible the crisis is. There are news outlets out there that report on that. The Guardian, from which this article has been taken, actually has a daily column on the climate crisis, 4 items that rotate. And yet even the Guardian somehow chose to bury the lead on this one. The title, as you can see, is Global Economy Could Face 50% Loss in GDP between 2070 and 2090 because of the rise of the global temperature, the average by 3 degrees Celsius. And here's the lead that is buried deep inside the article at 3 degrees Celsius or more. Hitting by 2050, there could be more than 4 billion deaths, excess deaths. I really don't know what more to say about this. This is the situation we are facing. 4 billion excess deaths in the wrecked planet. And I would really like to know the cause. And I believe I had a good inkling of what the cause is. Here we are in this room, and sorry about the overused metaphor, the elephant, which is actually maybe outside the room. And I actually was curious. I became curious where the metaphor, where the comparison with the elephant in the room comes from. Turns out it's from my own culture. There was a Russian poet and fable maker who wrote about almost 200 years ago about the visit by some rich guy to a museum where he saw everything down to last little smallest insect. And yet, when he exited, he was asked, what about the elephant? And he said, I forgot, did notice the elephant. I failed to notice the elephant. As I was going down the rabbit hole on the Wikipedia about that, I discovered that this phrase appeared in the British Journal of Education in 1915, presented as a trivial illustration of a question British schoolboys would be able to answer, as in, is there an elephant in the classroom? Completely flabbergasting. I mean, in 1915, that's what you'd ask British school children, as opposed to, can you point to an absolutely useless world war that's raging right now outside the walls of the classroom? No, it was the elephant in the classroom, non-existent elephant, just to add to that. So, is there an elephant in the classroom of climate change? Does anyone want to point? The single word can mark the elephant, the invisible elephant. This is why I didn't want to share the slides ahead of time, so my apologies for that. Well, it will be revealed. So here's one take on the invisible elephant in the classroom. CO2, the invisible thing in the climate change room, and somewhat confused looking, and a bunch of little people, each clamoring about possible different cause of climate change. I particularly dislike some of those comments. I mean, dislike is a too moderate a word here. As in this one, we need to create social justice and equality, as if, regardless of the climate crisis, wouldn't it be nice to have social justice and equality? Or this is really sneering. We need a deal that is new and green and quite complicated. No, forget about people, forget about social justice and equality. It's the big elephant, carbon dioxide in the room. So let me give you a hint. CO2 is not the cause of climate change. I was actually interested in the literature on carbon capture. I mean, according to the previous slide, it's carbon dioxide. All you need to do is capture the carbon, somehow sequester it, maybe in the soil, maybe some by industrial process, and the problem will be solved. So I did some quick research, asked Google Scholar for recent papers on carbon capture, and I found this one, carbon dioxide sequestration. Don't even read the title, just the first 3 words suffice. And I scrolled all the way down to the bottom of that paper, and I found the obligatory for that journal, which is Journal of CO2 Utilization, declaration of competing interests. The authors declare there is no conflict of interest regarding the article. Immediately following that, an acknowledgement, the paper is part of the outcomes of a research project funded by King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals. Godzilla facepalm. I mean, this was a paper chosen at random from a recent crop of Googled materials on carbon sequestration. So this kind of behavior needs to be uprooted. And there are people among us in this room who are working towards uprooting this bad practice, this bad thing. Fossil-free research, some wonderful undergraduates in different universities, including this one, who work looking at people's funding, specific projects funded, specific departments funded. And when they discover that fossil fuel interests fund some kind of research, it's very useful. It's a sure sign that that research cannot be trusted. So back to the quest for the elephant in the room. another attempt to paint a symptom as a cause. So business, no, it's not the business. Business is not the elephant in the room. The real elephant is the decline in social justice. I mean, again, if I were to strike my head against the desk in desperation every time I see nonsense like that on the screen, I would need a paramedic at the end of the hour. So let us dispose of this. Here's another one. This is a bit subtler. In fact, for a while, when I stashed this meme away for possible future use, it kind of made sense to me, maybe because of my computer science training. I really like to code, I like to program. And at some point, I also became interested in the issues that this bright student is asking her teacher. Yeah, learning to code, wonderful, but teacher, after that, could we learn how to survive in a civilization threatened by ecosystem collapse, rising sea levels, and the resulting geopolitical turmoil, armed conflict, and the increasing polarization of ideological orientations, and humanity's seemingly insatiable appetite for stuff? So it's actually a great assignment, like something to do in your spare time if you want to raise your political consciousness a bit, to take apart this unquestionably relevant proposal by the students or request from the teacher, but to see where it comes short and where it even obfuscates issues, because this student may not know better than, for instance, to use the term polarization, which pretends that both sides of the so-called political spectrum should be treated on equal terms. So I can go, indeed, I did go for an entire 2 hours. The use of language in the context of climate change is one of the topics I covered in my other course this semester, which just finished, but this is still not it. So we can send this one away as well. Here's a hint to the cause of the climate change, a very well-known cartoon from a few years back in the New Yorker. Yes, the planet got destroyed. The elder tells the kids here around the fire. But for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So with this hint, anyone wants to voice, to name the beast, the invisible beast in the room? Starts with C, a capital C. Yes, you got it. Who was it? Thank you. So today actually is the birthday of Karl Marx, which makes this entirely appropriate to share. The title is not real. The title has been doctored. So we have been warned. Now let me move on. I have a number of papers from primary literature. Most of them are from my discipline, which is psychology, and some adjacent disciplines like sociology. So if you're interested in the material that I merely flash on the screen because I don't have enough time, you can follow up. The PDF of these slides will be shared. You can look up the papers and make what you will out of them. This one is about climate justice, capitalism, and the political role of psychological professions. Capitalism is the cause. We all know the term Anthropocene, but it doesn't do justice to the situation, because it pretends that it's the human race, as in our species, are responsible for the crisis and for the catastrophe, as if for most of the duration of our so-called civilization, the socio-political order was actually in the hands of the people who now suffer from the climate breakdown. So using the term Anthropocene depoliticizes the climate emergency. Everyone is not equally responsible for climate change, and the consequences of it are not distributed equally. It's overwhelmingly the result of extractive and exploitative capitalist production. Mainstream responses to climate change have largely neglected what can be called capitalocene, focusing instead on consumer behavior. So we will not do that today. I want to share a cartoon that goes way back to 1911, the pyramid of the capitalist system, just to have it handy in our heads. We have here capital at the top, of course, people who rule us, the people who fool us, the people who shoot at us. Us, I guess I belong here probably, although I do work for a living, but I'm definitely privileged, more so than the poor people here. And then the people who work for all and feed all are down here. So what this illustration doesn't tell you is that it is capitalism that causes genocide and ecocide. And I put ecocide in boldface because that's our focus today. By forcing growth, exponential growth, that any scientist here and probably most non-scientists know is inherently unsustainable. Materials and energy extractivism, because growth needs to be sustained, needs to be kept going. Wars over markets and resources, because those are limited. Our planet is finite, so we have to fight others for resources. Consumerism and individualism, this is what we get from the system. So problems with capitalism are many. I will focus on just a couple of them. Again, more details here from me next semester if you join my course about climate change. Capitalism environmentally destructive. This was listed, the date on this paper is 2024. The draft goes way back. I highlighted because it's particularly relevant for today. And I want to highlight also the first point here. Capitalist class relations perpetuate eliminable forms of human suffering. So I have studied, one of my scientific domains of inquiry is consciousness, and suffering is kind of an inherent aspect of consciousness. And if you start even just scratching the surface in the literature on suffering, you realize that there are two kinds. There is unavoidable suffering and avoidable. Unavoidable suffering comes from just being conscious, comes from knowledge of death and from the actual death, which we cannot escape. But then we have avoidable suffering caused by societal dynamics, wars, poverty, hunger, illnesses that can be cured, political oppression, and the climate catastrophe. So that's what the capitalist socioeconomic system perpetuates. Capitalism sometimes, under some conditions, can accommodate some degree of ecological care, especially if there's profit to be made from that. But the essential irrationality of the drive for capital accumulation, for accumulating more and more wealth, subordinates everything to the requirements of self-expansion of capital, so-called growth. That's hostile to ecological balance. There's no avoiding that. You can't reconcile growth and ecological balance. This is from the first paper, whose title page was on the screen a couple minutes ago. Speaking of sustainability, I have another paper for you, which is worth reading if you care about sustainability as a concept and as an approach to the crisis. You should know a thing or two about that. And there's no single better source for that than this book chapter by Ajay Chaudhary, Sustaining What? It asks, Capitalism, Socialism, and Climate Change. So he calls the situation a sustainability paradox. On the one hand, analysis, models, policies, and projects are committed to fundamental system preservation, not the ecological system preservation, but the preservation of the socioeconomic system. On the other hand, we understand that anthropogenic climate change is caused by that very socioeconomic activity. So you have two conflicting interests which cannot be reconciled within a single framework. That paradox leads to the situation we are in. So capitalism or something worse, and actually something worse will be mentioned in a couple of minutes if you thought nothing could be worse than our current situation, is perfectly capable of surviving and persisting. So capitalism is sustainable for a while until everything, all the planetary systems crash. That's the cost, catastrophic socioecological cost. Socioecological sustainability can be made to work, but only if capital is no longer the organizing principle and the organizing logic. And it's important to note, as Chaudhary notes in this chapter, that this statement is not even a political statement. It's just an observation. It's merely descriptive. What has been said so far, what I said in the last couple of minutes, it's just a description of what's going on. A political turn would be to take that observation or that set of observations and draw conclusions that necessarily would have to be political, as this author proceeds to do. But I want to dwell a little more on sustainability because, well, this is not difficult to find a meme. that captures the essence of the concept of sustainability. I want to dwell for a couple more minutes on that because Cornell just exited successfully from April, which was the sustainability month. And this is what Cornell, I guess, I should say, what we did about it. We doggedly sustained the status quo. That's what was sustained during April at Cornell. In the first week, we, Cornell, lobbied to sustain our gas plant's right to expansion. In the second week, we sustained the inadequate climate action plan against the student assembly. So President Kotlikov came out explicitly with a rebuttal to the student assembly latest resolution about climate change and what needs to be done. And the rebuttal was just entirely empty of content, just a bunch of talking points with which we are familiar. If you peruse Cornell's official documentation on the wonderful job we, Cornell, are doing on the dimensions of sustainability, you'll know exactly what Kotlikov said in that rebuttal. The remainder of the month, we sustained fossil turf. So you may have seen those small notes, tall grass, small gas outside, about how Cornell doesn't mow grass when it's not needed, or doesn't need to be mowed. But in fact, in place of real grass that athletes would be exercising over, Cornell, against the wishes of all the climate activist movements in town, went on, is pushing through the installation of astroturf, which is toxic. And unfortunately, I don't have time to expand on that topic either. So what a month. And remember, sustaining fossil fuel business as usual takes all of us. So be sure as Cornellians to pitch in. So what to do? Let's move from causes to curatives. This is still from the chapter by Chodori. Decarbonize. Decarbonize not only the energy sector, but all of economic life, starting with the global north, because we disproportionately emit carbon dioxide, and eventually this should spread to overall global energy sufficiency that must stay within planetary boundaries. We must decommodify basic social goods like healthcare, housing, energy, which we already know are better provisioned socially and whose current market realities are costly, cumbersome, and inefficient in ecological and economic senses. Healthcare is particularly important here. We keep witnessing those attempts to take away even the rudimentary attempt at the universal healthcare that was kind of in a half-assed manner implemented by the Obama administration. We need to end petro-farming, cheap food, and move instead to peasant agricultures, which can feed the world qualitatively and ecologically better, many times over than the industrial approaches. We have to restructure labor and start valuing labor that's really valuable and should be valued. Low carbon work includes work teaching and nursing, growing sustainable food and preparing it, caring for those who need it, making culture and art. This work is currently gendered, racialized, and undervalued, and it must become economically primary and properly valued. We have to move beyond growth. Exponential growth is not sustainable. And we can only do all of the above by taking an international approach, because doing it in one country, taken separately, cannot succeed because we all share the atmosphere and the oceans. Maybe one more comment on growth or degrowth. Again, I don't have time to go into details here. Here's an illustration. Nice elephant here appears. Well, growth is not as nice as this elephant looks. Steady state, the same, as opposed to more of the same. Recession is less of the same. Degrowth is something completely different. Again, ask me later if you like, I'll tell you more, show you the literature about that. So there are obstacles ahead. This is not easy to do. Some of those obstacles are physical and are guarded, as in a line of militarized police armed to the teeth standing between you, envision yourself as this guy on the horse, actually one of the indigenous protesters against the Dakota Access Pipeline from the protests that happened in 2016, and militarized, not military police, as yet, soon it will be actual military police in this country, are standing there ready to smash some heads in. The legal system, we know who those answer to, we know who buys the seats on the Supreme Court in this country. The legal system is entirely on the side of the militarized police. So Greenpeace, of all activist movements, was slapped with a fine, just a trifling $660 million for their participation in the Dakota pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline protests. Of course, this is supposed to just shut them up because it takes away all of their money. So this is what you expect to meet when you try to do something about this catastrophic situation. It should go without saying, but I will say here on the record, good people disobey bad laws. But it's difficult to do so, and it's becoming more and more difficult to disobey bad laws because we have this component of the capitalist system. As Ursula Le Guin wrote in The Dispossessed, one of her protagonists remarks, the individual cannot bargain with the state. The state recognizes no coinage but power, and it issues the coins itself. So then what we get is scenes like this, one of many. Again, I was hard pressed to choose a specific one. I chose this one because it's actually not from the United States. It's from Europe. And if you thought Europe is this benign place, well, comparing to what's going on here, it's kind of benignish. But well, you'll see in a second what happens. This, by the way, is a presentation by Voice of America, which was defunded by the current regime in Washington. So there's no sound, the sound goes to my speakers, but casually spraying protesters with tear gas because they are blocking the road. Speaking of blocking roads, this is a photo from a street in Valencia, Spain, from a year ago when they had the millennial flood, like once a millennium, which is likely to recur in maybe a few months or maybe a couple of years because the millennial disasters now happen day in, day out. These are cars swept by the flood that are blocking the road, and the police is helpless, and, spraying the cars with tear gas will not help even the police. Speaking of, from The Guardian a couple of days ago, a tiny little headline, US Army plans for a potential parade of 6,600 soldiers on Trump's birthday. Those funny little fascists kind of, it's fun to laugh about them because they are so laughable until push comes to shove. And this actually is not laughing matter at all. And if you think this cannot happen here, I have some bad news for you. This is happening here. This paper from Sociology, Global Capitalism and 21st Century Fascism, a US case study back in 2012. If you thought that the US administration at that time was significantly more benign than the current one, well, it was on some dimensions, it was more benign, but on others, not so much. So read that paper if you want details. A more recent one to explain fascism today. The three take-home points from this one is capitalism is the cause of the climate crisis. Fascism always arises out of the way Subin puts it, acute economico-psychological crisis, and we are in one, definitely. And fascism then goes on to preserve capitalism while perpetuating the crisis. So the fascist takeover of Europe, if you just count the wars aspects of it, say the regime in Germany, lasted for the 1,000-year Reich, lasted for all of 12 years, 1933 to 1945. And the rest of the world was lucky because the Germans were this close to developing nuclear weapons, but didn't quite come close. This time around, the fascist power will be in the possession of nuclear weapons, unless we all do something about it. I don't think it's too late. Coming back to my adopted discipline, psychology, the psychology of capitalism, unmasking its role in psychology. So it actually has affected the psychology of people, not just of the academic discipline, but people's psychology in ways that are summarized on the next slide. The author, Karim Betash, writes that capitalism generates distinct cultural syndromes that emerge from the unique historical experiences of Western societies, are deeply rooted in the core principles of capitalism: profit motive, market competition, and private property ownership. What we ended up is with this overarching individualist syndrome. The slide is too loaded with text, so I will just highlight maybe a point or two from it. What it has on the left is those three key characteristics of capitalism: profit motive, market competition, private property. And the consequences for what's going on in people's heads, in yours, in mine, are here. The gain primacy syndrome, as in perpetual self-optimization, profit-seeking orientation, entrepreneurial self-identity. Here from market competition, we have this zero-sum rivalry syndrome. The notion, the insane, literally insane, I can speak to that later, literally insane notion that my gain is necessarily someone's loss and the other way around. And the third point here, psychological phenomena that are well documented and have been taken by psychologists as parts of human nature. Well, guess what? They are parts of human nature under capitalism. And the one item that I highlight here, education for economic utility, which is under the culture rubric. We are right now, all of us, experiencing education for economic utility. All of you, except the few faculty and myself, are enrolled here at Cornell for educational purposes. So you're part of that machine. You're being worked on by that machine. Education under capitalism? Well, education under every system, as sociologists have pointed out, is geared towards reproducing the system, perpetuating the system. Paulo Freire, in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, writes about this factor, this state of mind that helps this perpetuation. Almost always during the initial stage of the struggle, the oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, tend themselves to become oppressors because their thought has been structured in that way. That's the model of humanity that they have and they try to emulate. So here's a cross-section through several stages of an educational, series of educational institutions, I guess, school, growing up, going to college, graduating. So some of you, any seniors here? Yeah, so heading through that door, and where you exit, you find yourself back in this pyramid. There's a name for it, which I picked up from that paper by Robinson and Barrera, the first one about the fascism in the US. Military, prison, industrial security, financial complex. And especially for the seniors in the room, welcome to the machine. This is one of those Pink Floyd, one of the bands that were popular when I was your age. So what to do? Again, Freire writing, it would be indeed naive to expect the oppressor elites to carry out a liberating education. So what we have to do is renounce oppression. It's very easy. You may have heard about that competition, maybe apocryphal competition for the shortest short story. Supposedly Hemingway wrote one, let's see if I remember it, for sale, baby shoes never worn, 6 words. So how to renounce oppression? 6 words, neither to rule nor be ruled. Very, very simple, not difficult to remember. A bit challenging to follow, but one has to be inventive and creative, and you have to have friends to do it with. You cannot do it alone. In fact, by definition, almost, and again, I can expand on what I mean, you cannot go it alone. Treat the root cause of the catastrophe, not the symptoms. You know, the word radical comes from the Latin root, which means root, radix. And here's an exhortation, a quote from Mariam Kaba, and the drawing is by an artist. I only know them by the name Iridescence on Mastodon, and they draw all kinds of cute creatures, sometimes with black flags. And if you're curious what black here stands for, ask me later. And the advice is, let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair. Because if we despair, then we are surely done for. I mean, that's the sure recipe for the catastrophe completing its course. I wanted to share this drawing as well. This is from the thesis work, the senior thesis work by one of the college scholars in arts and sciences from several years back, Alicia Wilk. Radicalism is what shines light on hegemony. Otherwise, that stays in the dark, and we don't know that it exists and that it pulls the strings. This is a well-known meme, which I share again for whatever it's worth. It's worth a lot. The system is broken and must be fixed. Nope. The system is working exactly as intended and must be destroyed. And some closing words. I want to quote from the work of scientist. He was a geographer and biologist, a political activist, and in this picture, grandfatherly looking figure, a very nice guy, Pyotr Kropotkin, who wrote a booklet titled An Appeal to the Young about a century and a quarter ago. And this is what he wrote. If abstract science is a luxury and practice of medicine mere chicane, if law spells injustice and mechanical invention is but the means of robbery, if the school at variance with the wisdom of the practical man is sure to be overcome, and art without the revolutionary idea can only degenerate, what remains for me to do? He replies, this is a question posed to him by a young acquaintance, presumably. He replies, well, I will tell you, a vast and most enthralling task, a work in which your actions will be in complete harmony with your conscience, an undertaking capable of rousing the noblest and most vigorous natures. What work? I will now tell you, or I would if I had more time. So I'll just leave you with your conscience. At this point, we have a lot of time for back and forth if you like, but not before I flash the QR for Cornell on Fire, a collective, students, faculty, staff, townspeople trying to stop the business as usual business about climate at Cornell, because this is a quote that resonates with me strongly by Walter Benjamin, a philosopher who was trying to escape the Nazis. He was in the south of France near the border with Spain, and he was about to cross the border, but he thought that the Nazis were about to catch up with him, so he killed himself. He wrote that things are status quo is the catastrophe. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much for your lecture today. I just had a question. What's the difference between degrowth and recession? I'm just curious about that, like the difference between them.
So the recession typically hits, as everything does, the disadvantaged most strongly. You know, all those austerity measures that are designed to balance the budget as if, money is real, which is a separate topic. Those hit the hardest people who need the most from the society. And I was just telling my other class, which was about consciousness, that right now we are in a situation, actually have been for quite a while, that any scarcity in any type of resource you can think of is artificially induced. If everything were distributed equitably, there would be no scarcity in food, none in healthcare, none in housing, none at all. You can read Murray Bookchin, for instance. He wrote about post-scarcity. I will think I have to know how I committed to pronouncing out loud this title. I have to finish it. Post-scarcity anarchism. So post-scarcity anarchism was written, I think, in 1984, and already then scarcity was not an issue. Natural scarcity, it's artificial. So a recession happens because of certain political reasons and moves, and they have nothing to do with scarcity, which means that degrowth can be, or a growth can be put in place definitely without harming, not only without harming people who are hurting right now from the situation, but while actually boosting most of the people on the planet. In all relevant regards, all regards relevant to actual well-being, as opposed to capitalist invented notions such as GDP. Answer the questions? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I appreciate the transparency. Do you think that that calling out this system that we're all in, calling out capitalism, is enough to overcome it and to change it?
Is it enough? A few years back, I wrote in a book that like counting my privileges, observing that the United States political system is such that the people in power are so secure in their power, in their position, that they allow people like me to just blab on about whatever. They don't care, they don't have to care. Apparently something has changed, because people like me, I mean, if I were to give this talk in certain states that I will not mention of this great union, I could be hauled away. In fact, at some point I might be hauled away because I'm naturalized American. I could be denaturalized. Okay. That means that maybe even just talking may budge something. I mean, the least it can do is just spread the word, wake up people. I know that being woke is sneered at by the fascists, for which the proper response should be fuck that. And yet, let me just share a result from a psychological paper on what's effective and what's not effective actually for people's well-being in terms of contending with the climate crisis. So there is a notion out there that activism helps the activists, but it also depends on what kind of activism. And in that paper, one of the tables lists on one side what students actually polled by the researcher said about how they feel about the crisis. On the other side of the table, what they actually do about the crisis. And one of the entries at the table had a long list of grievances, completely understandable, of how bad the person felt about the crisis. And on the other hand, the cell in the table was almost empty. There were just two items listed there. Post on social media and drink oat milk. So that, I can tell you, is not enough. So you have to organize. We have to organize. There is one tool in our toolbox that is surefire. It never fails. A general strike, a real general strike. It can shut down even the bastion, the state, the powers that be surrounded by the military and whatever. Nothing can function if just the basics are denied to even just to the troops, don't agree ahead of time, don't accede to unlawful demands as if laws on their own would help a lot. But more importantly, organize, fight back with the tools you have. This is one tool we have, general strike. And there's only one outcome to that kind of fight. And it's a win on part of the workers. It's very simple. There are historical precedents.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a question about, you mentioned a lot of undergrads are the ones looking into whether fossil fuel institutions are funding research. I was curious as to what impact they have as undergrads and like how do they get their concerns out so that it can affect like the broader community who uses it.
If the fossil-free person here wants to be called out, let them wave their hand. Otherwise, I'll try to respond. You're a fossil-free person?
Oh, wait. No, I thought you were asking us the question. Never mind.
Well, I don't want to presume to speak for them, but I think it's not just personal satisfaction, it's real impact. This gets into major news outlets, and one thing that those powers don't like, which is why they are trying to silence movements and activists, is publicity. So publicity still works in this country still. No, you want to add?
Cornell is tied to the fossil fuel industry, and we're going to start transitioning to a more activism-based campus movement called Sunrise Cornell in the fall. So if anybody is interested in getting involved in the fall, you can talk to me at any point. But the research we've done has been featured in The Guardian with other campus climate networks on fossil fuels. And so like it does have an impact, and the administration is aware of it. And like we are trying to build up the climate movement at Cornell. So it's not just going into the void.
Thank you. I mean, Kyoto now, remember, you were like, some of you were born after the Kyoto Now resolution was passed here by Cornell. It was pushed for by student activists. It would not have happened without them. There was a maybe not insignificant role on part of the then president, was a classicist, Hunter Rawlings, and he's no longer in the business. So sometimes individuals have an impact, especially in putting the brakes on things.
Hi, thank you for talking with us. I guess I have like a uncomfortable question. For people in this room who may just like disregard what you have to say or wave you off as like a radical or extremist, like what is your background, or like why should people listen to what you have to say? Sorry if that's like uncomfortable.
My background has little to do with why people might want to listen to what I say. Although if you're curious, I mean, I can share you can hear the accent. I share that I am a naturalized American. So I'm educated in some of the disciplines that do the most, maybe initially have been doing it inadvertently to destroy the planet, like engineering, different disciplines in engineering. So I know a thing or two about engineering. I also know a thing or two about psychology by now, and sociology and anthropology and history. And I'm kind of old enough to have been around for a while and listened and seen things, not just in this country, in several other countries. But most of all, I think the cause, the papers that I shared the titles of, they lay down essentially the arguments that I identify with and I think are valid. And I identify with them, and I think they are valid because they are scientific arguments. Marx tried to pass himself as a scientific historian, scientific social scientist. In his time, there was no sociology to speak of. Psychology was not yet a distinct discipline either. So in the places where Marx attempts to be the most scientific, like historical materialism, the inevitability of revolutions, the march to progress and all of that, he's the most wrong. But the modern takes on Marxism. You can read, for instance, David Harvey, who is at CUNY, is active now. They all amplify the actual real science, and it's cross-disciplinary science. It's sociology again, it's history, it's anthropology, and it's psychology. It's increasingly psychology as well. So that's why people should listen to these arguments. They are not my arguments. I am just a channel here.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering how you got involved with Cornell on Fire, and if applicable, how do you help them craft their message?
How we craft the message? The involvement, my involvement with Cornell on Fire was my lucky strike. Luckily for me, I was approached by a person with a design for a movement already in mind, and I was immediately taken over by the idea. Unfortunately, it was very late in my career. So it was only, this movement started only a year and a half ago. And through most of my career, I've been sleepwalking through the pretense of first that science is always impartial and always value free, and that engineering is always to be employed except by some very, very evil people for the betterment of humanity, and all those notions, the notion that the academia is this wonderful world which has nothing but positive to it. In fact, when I was brought to Cornell, when I was hired by Cornell, I was handed a booklet by a history professor that recounts the story of Cornell's founding, the founding of the university. You probably all know the fantastic coming of minds together of a professor, Andrew Dixon White, and Ezra Cornell, a self-made man. And I was so taken with it that subsequently for like 15 years, I thought I was just having this wonderful privilege of being part of one of the best institutions on earth. So universities are, or I should say could be, some of the best institutions on earth. But it took me so long to realize that Cornell was founded on dispossession, this so-called land grant university, which I was made to feel so proud about being part of. We know now what's the proper name for that. It's a land grab university. So with a lot of disillusionment came also some insight, and I hope it comes across that I'm actually not pessimistic about the situation, because I'm seeing people waking up and realizing that things need to be done, and how to do them, how to come together. Maybe also in response to your question, in 2012, I published a book with happiness in the title. It wasn't one of those inane positive psychology books, but it did have happiness in the title, for which I almost immediately started feeling very, very guilty, because of this notion that I helped propagate, that you just have to, do 1, 2, 3, 4, several parts of a pretty well-known recipe, and you'll be happy. And then people in interviews started to ask me questions. So how can I be happy if I can't make ends meet? Or my sister has cancer. How can I be happy? I tried to make up for that. So I put together in what way an academic could make up for that. I put together a seminar on inequality, power, and happiness, which I taught for several semesters, several years, and I learned a whole lot from that. So that was, I think, maybe one of the starting points, not the main one, of my transformation. So maybe that's a compliment to my answer to your question.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. This kind of goes off of what you were just saying. It's a pretty open-ended question, but based on history and what you've seen currently, do you have a prediction on if change will come in the near future in our lifetime to change the capitalist system?
So my favorite author, Ursula Le Guin, said when she was receiving the National Book Award in, I think, 2018, just before she passed, she said, we live, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, we live in capitalism, its power is inescapable, So was the divine right of kings. Things cannot happen until something snaps and they happen. So I want, actually, since I did mention the general strike earlier, I want to recommend that you look up her short story. It's like 5 pages, the day before the revolution. It has the phrase general strike with a definite article there, the general strike. And when I teach this in my classes, I make the point of stressing the definite article. It has to be the general strike, and it's the general strike that topples a regime. And no regime, again, no regime can survive a truly general strike.
Hi, thank you so much. This talk was really interesting. I am graduating in a couple weeks, and I was wondering, the stuff you said about Cornell pushing their students towards the military, prison, industrial security, financial complex in terms of jobs. What actions could Cornell do right now to shift their pedagogy away from encouraging their students toward this model and instead towards a more like Freirean model, like you said?
Yeah, I hope my sign carried across through the mic. So Cornell is what it is by design. Cornell is ruled by the board of trustees, who are all of them financial interests, industrialists, some oily interests, a token student representative, I think just one, maybe a couple more, I think maybe one, two faculty representatives. This is the governing body. They can fire or hire. It's more important, they can fire the president and the provost. And just imagine having a board of trustees composed of people who care about the planet, who care about education, as in pedagogy of the oppressed and the pedagogy to avoid further oppression. Things might change. But again, if students together decides, this would be like a university-wide equivalent of the general strike. If students together, enough students, don't have to be all of them, decide that they want a different kind of education, this will happen because I'm sure there are faculty out there who can help. And it is known what needs to be taught, and we can learn even just, or maybe especially just from our nearest neighbors, the indigenous peoples who live on this land and who have known for millennia how to properly educate their children so that the environment doesn't get killed in the process. And yet, with the current makeup of the Cornell administration and the people they put in charge of sustainability efforts, things are not going to budge. So I'm on this committee, the climate curriculum committee. I was invited to join, I guess, because well, I have nothing to lose. I'm tenured, I guess, if they fire me, that would be very, very interesting. I think someone, I don't want to even guess who, thought I might be co-opted by making me part of this like tiny corner of the establishment who decide what the curriculum should be like. Like, students here, you guys, are you consulted when the curriculum is being put together? No, no. Have you ever wondered why you're not consulted? So the power is ours. We don't want to share it. But nothing of this kind, nothing in what I just said is unchangeable. It's all amenable to change. And I think it's clear by now what needs to be done. A big problem is, like, you seniors, you're a problem, because once you learn how to act together, you leave. You should stay behind. No, please graduate successfully and go on and do great things out there. But continuity in student activism is very important. And this too can be done. This can be managed.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering, do you think socialism or communism is a better way for a sustainable future compared to capitalism?
Of vanguardism. So some people decide maybe because they are better educated than others, or maybe because they're actually closer to killing the earth, that they are the vanguard and they should be obeyed. And this happened in every big revolution in the previous century. This happened in Russia in 1917. One of the first acts on part of the Bolshevik, the communist government, was to abolish any opposition, kill any anarchists they could lay their hands on. Hundreds of people died in raids in just a few days in St. Petersburg, in Moscow. That's what happened in China in 1949. What we got in China is basically first a long period of even more abject poverty than before, and then state capitalism with the poverty built into it. You know, they had in China for a while, they had this wonderful policy called the Iron Rice Bowl. Every family was guaranteed the food they need to survive, which was abolished by, I think, the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, because they decided that China needs to grow as an advanced country. It needs to match or maybe overtake the West. And what we have as a result is state capitalism. So there are no examples to go by in which one root cause, in this one root cause might be discerned. It's the state. The problem is with the state. When the revolution takes over the state, it becomes the state. And as I argued today, capitalism is preserved by the power of the state. When it feels that its power over the state is teetering on the brink, it calls up the brown shirts, which is what's happening in this country right now. If you want to look to large-scale examples of the kind of existence that does not destroy the planet, and as the people really well off on the dimensions that matter, you can look up to the Zapatista enclaves in so-called Mexico, in Chiapas, the state of Chiapas, EZLN, Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, Zapatista Army of National Liberation. They have been holding to their territory for 40, 41 years now, pushing back against paramilitaries, against the federales, basically running a society where everyone has what they need, according to that famous maxim that was never implemented in the actual so-called communist societies. There is another example, historical example, also ongoing right now, and this is Free Kurdistan, Rojava, the autonomous North Syria confederation run by Kurdish people. Now, as always, actually, now in danger from the new Syrian government, always in danger from the fascist Turkish government, under attack from all sides, but still surviving after many years. They have what they call democratic confederalism. They have real women's rights. They have real freedoms. And those are the examples to be looked up to.
Thank you for your talk. I was just curious, when you were discussing the decommodification of goods, you mentioned housing. And then later when you were talking about the roots of capitalism, you mentioned private property again. So my question was, do you think that the complete elimination of private property is part of the solution? And if so, how does that play back into addressing climate change?
Yeah, it's one of those bogeymen, you know, they are coming for your cat or your kids' toys. I mean, this is ridiculous, but of course it's propaganda that has been waged against people who just want workers to take over the means of production. If your private property happens to be the factory that your dad owns, tough luck. But if your private property is, you know, your home, unless it's a mansion, maybe you're on bad luck. So seriously, this is what the Russians did to a large extent in 1917. And what came out of it was not good on any dimension. So we have to learn from history and not, not to follow the mistakes all over again. I hope that satisfies the answer.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today. I'm a bit curious because I'm under the impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're somebody who talks about fascism and the machine and the climate crisis, especially at a university like Cornell, you tend to be often speaking to an audience of people who really agrees with you. And of course, there are always going to be people who don't. But in general, I think the people who take a class and come to a lecture and read a book, I mean, you're talking to a room of environmental science majors. I hope we all believe in the climate crisis. So I'm wondering how, even with on a university like Cornell to give you a platform, how do you put yourself in a place and give yourself an audience of people who don't necessarily agree with you? Because you also mentioned that you're not pessimistic about our current state and you see people every day like waking up and realizing that change needs to be made. How are you accessing those groups? Because I think so many students are already at that mindset. So I'm wondering how you're changing these minds.
So first, let me agree with you on the compliment that you just paid to other people in the class. So I totally agree that students at Cornell are more aware of the situation, like maybe most, not all the dimensions of the situation. But still, let's see how many of your professors, especially if you're a senior, you have been here for 4 or 5 years, mentioned the general strike as a tool in making the world better. You. Well, that makes sense. I'm very happy for you. So some work needs to be done even here. Apart from that, I'm doing what I can. I mean, I meet people outside Cornell, and when I do, I don't hold back. I mean, what you witnessed now is me holding myself back a bit. I'm typically more outspoken, and that's what I do. I'm a professor. Not enough, but I do what I can.
Hi, thanks for speaking to us today. So one of your points you mentioned was key jobs such as teaching, nursing, and agricultural work being undervalued in the current economy. Do you think that there's a way to fix that within the capitalist system?
In the capitalist system, so we can go point by point over that list and argue whether or not it can be fixed within the system. It depends on the power that is attached to the would-be competitors of the, say, small-scale agriculturalists. And typically, the small scale, the little folk, they don't come as a winner out in such situations. And I can cite, I think, am I running out of time?
5 minutes. Okay.
Let me cite an example, a historical example, somehow close to the surface of my consciousness right now. So in capitalism, there is this notion, the theory of capitalism, of primary accumulation, which is essentially plundering everything in sight so that you have enough wealth to then boost through growth of your enterprise. The British Empire had a tool for that, the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, then the British Raj in India was all about capital accumulation, so which was terrible for the native peoples of India. Tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, died of famine because of the withholding of help from the central government, the imperial government. But one of the things that they instituted in India was forcibly move peasants, farmers, away from subsistence agriculture and towards cash crops by a very simple means. So for instance, Darjeeling, they would levy taxes, and to pay taxes, you had to have cash. To have cash, you have to raise a cash crop. So that's how we have this wonderful tea from Darjeeling, because people were essentially forcibly put or made to grow tea instead of just subsisting and feeding their family in their village. That's one example.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk today. I was curious because you mentioned there's a lot of tools that are at our disposal to try to increase our ability to be sustainable society that capitalism just does not use, traditionally.
But I'm also curious about some of the tools that you think are available that certain nations and firms are going to use for their own ends, even if they are specifically designed or originally designed for sustainability and for a better planet. To be more clear, like basically, I'm asking, what do you think of firms that intend to use your ideas for their own gain?
So if I heard you right, is there anything good at all about sustainability? Just to paraphrase, or?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying, how do you like what are your thoughts on like preventing bad actors from using these tools?
The tools like the propaganda tools or the actual or what?
No, like actual like sustainability tools.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Like,
I guess I'll provide an example then. You mentioned power competition earlier in your presentation, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, considering that fact that great power competition, especially as of right now, is driven by the fact that a lot of countries intend to use clean technologies,
Yeah.
cleaner ways of development, so they can increase their allocative and technical efficiency in their own markets.
yeah.
So, how do you prevent those actors?
Okay, thank you. I think I got it. So I would just approach the term clean technology with a lot of suspicion. Because clean technology depends on resources and on workforce, on extraction of resources, typically from places that do not want their land turned upside down, and places that people who want to defend, Greenland from an American invasion, that kind of stuff. And so my advice would be to be of a skeptical mind, and every time you're told, just like when you're told sustainability, start asking questions. Every time you hear the phrase clean technology, start asking questions. Thank you.
So let's thank Shimon.